Chapter 11. The Fall. Mott was waiting alone on the outside at the door. Obviously, he knew what would be discussed in there and had chased the other servants away. I stopped when I saw him, cringing a bit as I waited for him to clunk me over the head or commit some other act to force me back into Connor's dining room. There was no cowardice in my nervousness. His hits came without mercy, but he only nodded at me. "You clean up well, for an orphan." I had helped. "Where were you going?" I scratched an itch on my face. Didn't really think that through yet. "Somewhere I can be alone." Mott appeared. Mott apparently had no inclinations to leave me alone. He put an arm on my shoulder and stared me down the hallway. "Come with me." We walked outside to the courtyard in the rear of Farthenwood, Farthenwood lined with torches that flickered in the breeze. On one wall were several swords. Each was different. One had a longer blade, another was thinner, another was jagged on one side. The tangs varied, from swords with a simple metal grip to ones wrapped in leather or crowned in jewels. One might appeal to a lifelong warrior, another to a mercenary. I suspected that one of these was supposed to appeal to a prince. "Choose one," he said. "How do I know that's right for me?" "It's the one that calls to you," Mott said. I reached for the one with the medium-sized blade, with a wide fuller grooved down the length. The hilt was wrapped in dark brown leather, and a circle of deep red rubies was set into the pommel. Almost as soon as I grabbed it, the sword fell from my grasp and landed on the ground. Mott darted forward and retrieved it, like I'd committed some sort of sin by dropping the sword. "This is obviously too heavy for you," he said. "Choose another one." "It was heavier than it looked. But it's fine now," I said, lifting it with both hands. "I choose it because it called to me." "Why?" I smiled. "It has rubies on it. I could sell those for a lot of money." "Try it, and I'll use the same sword to run you through as punishment. Have you ever held a sword before?" "Sure. I once held the sword of the Archduke of Montecrist after sneaking into a room where he was staying. I'd taken it, just to admire, of course, while he was asleep one night, but I hadn't held it for long before I was caught. My punishment was thorough, but it had been worth it just for a few minutes of holding a sword as fine as his was." "What's your training with the sword?" Mott asked. "I suspect not enough to make a clear match between you and me." Mott smiled. "I heard what Connor said to you in the dining room. Despite what he described as your limitations, you do have a chance to take the role of prince. But you must learn and train and give yourself every advantage you can. Now raise your sword." He demonstrated, holding his sword upright, nearly parallel to his body, and tilted outward, like this. This is the first position. I followed him and moved my sword as he did, like this. Get used to the feel of it in your hand. Swing it back and forth. Learn to control it, to balance it. I obeyed. Despite its weight, I liked the feel of the sword. I liked me with the sword in my hand. It stirred up memories of how I used to be, before the day-to-day survival that comes from living in an orphanage. "Still in the first position," Ma said. "This is where you begin any basic attack." "So I should avoid it then," I said. Mott raised an eyebrow. "Why is that?" If it's that basic, then it's the first move everyone learns, which means everyone knows how to defend against that one." Mott shook his head. "It doesn't work like that. Sword fighting isn't a chess game where you make one move, then so does your opponent." I sighed. "Obviously." Mott pulled a wooden sword off the wall, comparably to mine in length. "Let's test you, then. See how you do for a beginner." "Should I use a wooden sword, too?" That made Mott smile. "Even with the wooden sword, I can still do more damage to you than you do to me with a real one." As soon as he finished speaking, He cut a line through the air, passed my sword, and hit my shoulder. Would you at least try to stop me? He asked. I made a face and thrust my sword at him, and he parted it. Not bad, Mott said, but be bolder. Prince Jaren was known for that. Sounds like he's dead. So whatever his boldness was with the sword, it obviously didn't save him. Nobody could have survived so many pirates, Mott said. Nobody on the ship did survive. And they probably all had swords, I said, swiping at empty air when Mott took a step backwards. So trading me with one is useless. Relax your body, Mott said. You're too tense. Why me? I asked, lowering my sword. Why am I here? Why should not you be? Tobias is smarter than me, and Roden is stronger. Apparently, I have only a slight resemblance to what he feels the prince would look like today. Pot lowered his sword as well. Tobias may be more educated than you, but I have no doubt you're cleverer. Roden is stronger, but a strong heart will always overcome a strong body. He smiled. As for the physical resemblance, it would help if you cut your hair and stood up straighter. I can't see your face half the time you're speaking. Now raise your sword. Your problem is that you're trying to hit my sword. Hit me. I'd hurt you. This is a sword fight, Sage. That's the idea. I raised my sword and lunged at him. He stepped toward me and slid his sword up the inside of my blade, then rotated and pushed it down. My sword fell from my hand and clattered to the ground. Pick it up, Mott said. After glaring at him for a moment, I picked it up, but I held his blade down, making it clear that I was finished with this lesson. He frowned at me. I had you figured wrong. I thought you'd be more of a fighter. Fighting for what? The privilege of getting myself killed one day like Eckbert's family? Even if I did what Connor wants, I'd never feel like a prince. I'd only be playing the part, nothing more than an actor for the rest of my life. And what are you now? Mott lowered his own sword. You put on a facade of toughness, but I've seen you look frightened. You pretend to care for nobody, but I didn't miss your reaction when Latimer fell. And you pretend that you could run from your family in Avena without looking back. But I hear the tone of your voice when you speak of them. I don't think you hate everyone half so much as you claim to. You're an actor now, Sage. All Connor wants is for you to act on behalf of Carthier, rather than for yourself. Martin had hit closer to the truth than he realized. I didn't want to think about my fears, or about Latimer, or especially about my family. I handed him the sword and said, Thanks for the lesson, but I'll never be a prince. Interesting that you chose this sword, then, Mott said. It's a replica of the one Prince Jaren owned once. If Connor can look at you and see a prince, then it's about time you did the same.